I was a nervous wreck. I had no presence on air. I was like, today, the president is meeting with White House security advisors, Zbigniew Brzezinski. I was so worried about mispronouncing Zbigniew Brzezinski's name. Anyway, I came back to the newsroom and the desk assistant, he said, the president of the network called. He never wants to see you on the air again. I was like, wah, wah.
Hi, I'm Sally Christensen, the founder and CEO of Argent, a women's workwear brand. And this is Work Friends, a podcast for those who take their work, but not always themselves, seriously.
Work Friends.
Hi, everyone. I wanted to take a moment to say thank you for listening to Work Friends. In just a few months, we've hosted conversations with women I deeply admire, and we're just getting started. I do have a favor to ask. If you could please take a minute right now to follow Work Friends on whatever platform you're listening on so you'll never miss an episode. And we'd especially love it if you could leave us a review or send an episode you've loved to a friend. Feel free to check out the show notes for more about Argent, too. We're so excited to bring you more inspiring guests and candid conversations about careers you won't hear anywhere else. Your support of Work Friends and of Argent means everything to us. Thanks for listening. When we wanted to launch a podcast to have frank discussions about work and career, there was one person in particular that we knew we had to have as a guest. And while the term icon is thrown around a lot these days, Katie Couric absolutely is one. Katie is an award-winning journalist, podcaster, documentary filmmaker, author, and advocate for cancer awareness and research. Most famously, Katie was the host who greeted us every morning from behind the Today Show desk for over 15 years. However, her career has spanned nearly all major media outlets, including CNN, NBC, and CBS as the solo anchor of the CBS Evening News, the first woman to do so. Later, she became the host of her own daytime show, Katie, authored her New York Times bestseller, Going There, and today is the founder of her own multimedia news and production company, Katie Couric Media. It would be easy to go on and on about the incredible work that Katie has done and continues to do, but I'd much rather you hear it from her. Today's guest and my work friend, Katie Couric.
All right, here we go.
Oh, Katie, hi, welcome.
Hi, Sally. I'm very happy to be here, Miss Podcaster.
Really excited to have you here. How intimidating.
I think you'll be fine.
Don't turn it on me. Don't start asking me questions.
I won't. I'll try to resist because that is what happens.
How did we know each other? Do you remember how we met?
Yes. Well, I think you were obsessed with me.
That's right. Who isn't?
No, a lot of people are not. And I think we met for real at your voting event at the store.
Briefly.
Mm-hmm. The first year you did the pink suit.
Uh-huh.
I came by and there were a lot of people there and it was really fun. And is that the first time we met, Sally?
That's the first time we met. You were like the star of the show. Generally in that setting, I'll take a back seat. So we didn't really meaningfully interact outside of me saying thank you, but you were the hit of that day.
Oh, it was fun. I remember it was a pretty fall day and a lot of people came to the store and I loved everything about you and what you were doing and have gotten to know you. Since then, we went to a Knicks game together and sat on the court, which I think was your dream come true. Really, really fun. And of course, I've gone to a couple of dinners and we wrote voter letters together. So we've gotten to know each other. And I love thinking of women we can highlight. And I wasn't the original work friend, but I was early on in the idea.
You were. Yeah, you were one of the first classes, I feel like. I had to really be persistent.
You were very persistent. And in fact, we rewarded your persistence because Adriana, who was my assistant at the time, was like, oh my God, Sally just won't give up. And I was like, let's just do it. Let's do it to get her to stop emailing us. Not really.
It worked.
Yeah.
Or did it work? It backfired?
No. And it was so fun. And the experience was so fun. And I love the clothes that you make. And I love the campaign. And everybody was really fun at the shoot. And I remember thinking how smart you were to turn it into a video opportunity where you interviewed your work friends or the current class I was in and talk to them about all kinds of things. And I thought it was just really, really well done and well shot and well edited. And I don't know. It just was a very good illustration of the ethos and the mission of your company. Sorry.
Totally. Yeah, it's funny. People ask me all the time how I connect with the women that we feature or the women that are wearing Argent. So I'm very excited to have you here, but I'm also very grateful for all of your support.
Of course.
And
I'm so proud of you, Sally, honestly.
Thank you. So we're going to start with some icebreakers, not that we need them, but I'd love to hear about your biggest work pet peeve.
I guess my biggest work pet peeve sounds very 90s, but I don't like people who don't work hard and are unavailable, on the weekends or after hours, just because we're in the news business. It's one thing if what you're doing doesn't directly deal with news making events, but I think when you are in the business we're in and we cover what happens here and all around the world, you kind of have to understand that you give up some of your kind of work-life balance.
Yeah.
And I'm all for work-life balance, but, I think that it's hard in what I do to have these very strict boundaries. And most of the best people I know who are as interested and passionate about the news are, excited to be involved when something happens.
I don't think that advice is specific, or that pet peeve is specific to media either. I think there is a generational change that's happened with maybe Gen Z.
Yeah, I think so. And maybe even millennials. I remember when I had a talk show that was syndicated and we were interviewing people. I remember saying to someone, could you take this to FedEx? And she said, I can't because I'll miss my jitney to the Hamptons. Listen, I think probably if that hadn't been an intern or something, I would have been, oh, okay, I'll get someone else to do it. But I just remember thinking, wow, I never would have done that when I was starting out or when I was an intern. I would have figured out something or taken a later jitney or, now maybe employers should be a little flexible too. I mean, I think there's a nice middle ground, but sometimes I think the pendulum swings too much to, somebody who has such strict guidelines in terms of when they're available and what they're willing to do, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes a ton of sense. I feel like for me, when I hire someone, I'm like testing what they're willing to do and if they're capable, and then you earn additional responsibilities and exposure. You're certainly the poster child for that. I'd take this as an opportunity to compliment your team, but Adriana, who you mentioned earlier, and Alyssa are both remarkable. And so I think you surround yourself by great talent.
I try to, and I also, we started this media company. I wanted to be an opportunity for learning, for growth, for exposure. And, I think I've hired people who weren't particularly interested in what we were doing and realized pretty quickly you don't necessarily belong here because not that you're a bad person, but if you're not passionate about what we're doing and really engaged in what we're doing, then I want to give the opportunity to someone else. And I don't want people who just punch a time clock and see this as a job. I want people to see it more as a calling. And not everyone, this is not a criticism, but not everyone falls into that category.
Totally. Yeah, I think there is a saying, it's good work gets more work. And I think that is true. But I think for those that are hungry and interested in whatever industry
and want to go the extra mile,
yes.
Listen, I mean, that's the key to life is going the extra mile, in my opinion.
Agreed.
If you are enthusiastic, what can I do? Or you come up with ideas. I remember when I was an intern at ABC News in Washington, this was in the dark ages, Sally, but I remember there was a reporter for 2020 named Don Farmer, and he seemed nice. So I went to his office. I was a desk assistant. I was 23 years old. And I had written down a list of story ideas for him for 2020. And, I asked him, may I come in for 10 minutes? And there was a Center for Compulsive Gambling in Pikesville, Maryland that I had heard about and all these other stories. And I basically said, I think these would be really good for 2020. P.S. Flash forward. And he and his wife, Chris Curl, had a show on CNN. And he remembered me from that. And I ended up being associate producer and then a producer for a show. And then because I wanted to be on air and wanted to do reporting, he gave me opportunities to do that. And then when someone kind of said something inappropriate to me at a meeting at CNN in Atlanta. It was Don Farmer I went to, and he said, sit down, we're going to write a memo to this person. And he and I got on his Selectric IBM typewriter, and together we fashioned a memo that basically told the vice president of CNN that it was inappropriate for him to talk to me that way. So isn't that funny? Just from that one step of going to his office, giving him story ideas, it ended up he was an incredibly important person in my career, a great mentor, and somebody who really opened doors for me and believed in me.
It's great career advice, I think, living by what's the worst that could happen or what do you have to lose, because the outcome could have been it went nowhere, but there's no downside to you walking in and being bold, I feel like,
Yeah. And I had enough confidence to think my ideas were good, were worthy, and deserved being heard, and I think a lot of women, Sally, ask me, where do you get your confidence? Because I think there is a bit of a crisis in confidence among young women
and men, I think,
and men in the professional world. And I'm not sure how to fix that. We have to figure it out, because I think for me, it was always a kind of fake it till you make it mentality. I remember I was in a low-level job at CNN, and the Washington bureau chief said, I want you to try going to the White House and you can report on what the president is doing that day. Well, I had really never done on-air reporting. And so I was a nervous wreck. I was terrible. And I was like, I had no presence on air. I was like, today, the president is meeting with White House security advisors, Zbigniew Brzezinski. I was so worried about mispronouncing Zbigniew Brzezinski's name for good reason. Anyway, I came back to the newsroom, and the desk assistant, a guy named Bill Hensel, he was very nice. He said, come over here. So I'm like, dee, 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 dee. I didn't think I was very good, but I didn't think I was a disaster. He said, the president of the network called. He never wants to see you on the air again. I was like, wah, wah. I was so deflated. And you would think that I would say, okay, I'm going to go be in the retail program at Macy's or something after that. But I said, okay. And I kind of thought, all right, I probably did suck. And I thought, well, I'm going to get better. And I looked around at all the reporters and I thought, what do they have that I don't have? Experience, that's all. So I set out to get more experienced. And, I think a lot of confidence comes from how you were raised, honestly. I think so much of it is having parents who maybe not too much, because I think now you're seeing these snowplow kids where their parents do everything for them. And I don't think that's a good idea, but have parents who think you're great, who believe in you, who give you good feedback, who give you constructive criticism too. But I had such great parents. I think they gave me that strong foundation and such a good sense of who I was, and so much confidence really from an early age, from when I ran for vice president of Jamestown Elementary and then president. And I won both. Thank you. And Stephen Russell went around. Isn't it funny how you remember? I feel
vividly.
like you remember things from way in the past and you can't remember what you had for breakfast.
Truly.
Yes. Well, I'm at that stage. But Stephen Russell went around the school and said that I had won by only 11 votes. I said, it's like, Stephen, it's like being a little bit pregnant. I didn't say that because I was only in 6th grade. But I remember thinking, well, I won. So shut up, Stephen Russell.
And what did happen at CNN that you touched on?
Yeah, well, I was 26 or 27, and I was filling in for a producer on the show that my friends Don Farmer and Chris Curl anchored. And I walked in, and everybody was around a table. It was all male, and one woman who did promos. It's so funny. I can see her face. And I walked in, and I'm not sure what they had been discussing, but the vice president of CNN, a guy named Ed Turner, not to be confused with Ted Turner, said, well, that's not like Katie. She's successful because of her industriousness, her work ethic, her excellent writing skills, and her breast size. And I remember I sat down, and I think it was it was like against the wall because all the chairs at the table had been taken. And I remember just my whole body getting hot. I was so weirded out, And I was 26. So this was in like 1983 or 4, maybe. But still, it was just such a weird, inappropriate thing to say. And that's when I went to Don Farmer and said, this happened. What should I do?
Can we talk about the step of having that conversation? I think there's so much to learn from. Those comments still happen. I think we like to assume they don't still happen. They happen in different ways. They are disgusting. They are sexist.
Oh my God, I was so stunned.
Yes, because those are shocking experiences. But what I will say is having trust in someone that is in a leadership role that you can approach with the circumstances and then invite in to help manage the situation.
I mean, how wonderful that this man, he passed away a couple of years ago, Don. I remember he turned around and he said, let's write him this memo or note. And I saved it. I saved the memo. It's in my sentimental box, which I have with stuff that is meaningful to me. And, but think if he had said, oh, he's just being a jerk. But honestly, the confidence that gave me to stand up to somebody and not always under the protective shadow of someone in Don's position. I think that was incalculable. Yeah. I mean, I'm still so grateful to him because I think my dad would have said the same thing, although I don't know if my dad would have been ballsy enough to say, write him a memo, right? I think my dad would have been worried that I would get fired.
Yeah.
But Don coming to my aid and putting it in writing.
And,
right?
And sharing his privilege,
He put it in writing. And I remember we wrote, I will keep this note between the two of us. But it was basically take this as a warning, you son of a bitch. Yeah. If you act like this again, I will go to whatever human resources department existed back then.
Yes, limited human resources.
Yeah, and he called me and apologized. But that was just such a great lesson. And I would hope everyone has a mentor like that.
Yes. Yeah, I remember when I was working at Cisco, I had a manager that was 2 levels above what I should have been reporting to. But when I got to the place where I was comfortable telling him about situations like this, I didn't have anything that extreme, but it changed the dynamic of our relationship. And I think it was so healthy for him. For Don, I think it's so important for men to understand the experiences that women are going through because it's so much more fraught than what men are experiencing, failing upwards.
Yeah.
And so I just think that that's necessary to bring allies into the change that needs to happen. It's so interesting hearing from you around sort of those early failures. And I do want to get into that later, but I think that women are shamed for any misstep. We're held to a different standard. I think that you came up at a different time and have honestly created opportunities for the next generation through your success and willingness to take the hits and get back up.
I hope so.
Definitely.
Maybe we should write a book, Sally, about confidence. There's so many books written, but I get asked this so much that it would be interesting to interview successful women and ask them what gave them confidence, what made them self-assured, willing to take risks, willing to be resilient if they fail, and just willing to kind of keep going.
My dream project. It's what I care about the most. And I do also credit my parents. Similarly, I had very supportive parents, but they just didn't really see gender. I have an older brother. They raised us the same. They just kind of threw us outside and you come back at dinner time. Yeah. Similar to your upbringing. Yeah. You touched on this a little bit, but I do want to talk about your childhood and how your dad first inspired your career in journalism. Everyone should read Going There, your book. I just read it recently after having gotten to know you. It's so excellent. And you do talk about this in your book. But for our listeners who haven't had a chance to pick it up yet, I want to talk about growing up with the example that he set.
Yeah. Well, I had 2 wonderful parents. I grew up, my mother was of a generation when women didn't really work. They volunteered, or my mom volunteered for Planned Parenthood, actually, which got me interested in reproductive rights from an early age. But my dad was just a really, really smart. My mom was too, but my dad was insatiably curious, read a ton, was a reporter for first the Macon Telegraph. He was from Dublin, Georgia, went to Mercer. I don't know if this will ring a bell with anybody, but maybe some of your Southern listeners will know Mercer in Macon. And then he worked for the Atlanta Constitution, and then he worked for United Press. He loved being a reporter. He just loved it. I think it satisfied his intellectual curiosity. I think he felt like he was in the middle of the action and really enjoyed it. But 4 kids later, it was really hard to raise 4 kids on a reporter's salary or even an editor's salary. So he ended up going into public relations. But I think he was always a journalist at heart. And he saw in me, I think, the fact that I was sort of a good writer and that I was kind of clever when I was younger. And he really nurtured that. He had me work at 3 different radio stations in Washington, D.C. I grew up in Northern Virginia and Arlington. This was before a lot of people did internships, and he made me get them myself. Although the first one, I think he knew someone who lived near us who owned WMAL, or a big radio station, and I went and talked to him. But anyway, in some of the cases, I would just go into the yellow pages and find the name, and I'd call the front desk and say, I'm interested in being an intern. They'd connect me to the news director. I'd ask if I could come in and talk to them. I really hustled.
Argent is a clothing brand on a mission to upgrade the working woman's wardrobe, remove barriers to success, and help women navigate their busy lives with beautiful, versatile, and functional apparel. Just in time for the holiday season, explore the newest arrivals, including all new suit silhouettes in our signature seasonless wool, and chic and cozy knitwear that's perfect for gifting. This happens to be my favorite collection, and it's infused with Argent's signature bold colors and functional details like interior pockets and blazers, and smart cuffs on sleeves that scrunch and magically stay in place. Visit argentwork.com to shop the new collection and join the community on Instagram @Argent. I talk about this a lot. It's like, if there's one person that you respect that believes in you, that's all it takes. If you have like 100 naysayers, if you have just that one, it can be all you need.
And I think that, having that inner strength and confidence, it got me through a lot of challenging times because I just fell back on that. And it's also like, how do you be assertive? Because I think women, it's a tale as old as time, are often accused of being pushy or demanding or obnoxious. And, the same qualities in a man are lauded and admired.
Well, and I think I'm similar to you. If I hear those things now, and a lot of it comes from experience, because I've certainly had moments where I'm picking up a phone and making the phone calls you just talked about to get internships, and you're nervous making those calls. Now I'm to the place in my career where I can see more in people's faults when they're behaving badly and saying these things to us. And I think
you can recognize
if someone's telling me that I'm being insert whatever pejorative here now, I think that I can recognize it more than I was equipped to in my 20s.
Yes, probably, I'm sure. And I think a lot has changed.
That's one of my later questions, so I'm just going to bring it up to now.
Okay.
What has improved, and what have you seen stay stagnant?
Well, I think that, first of all, women are kicking ass, so much so that there, I think, has been a backlash a little bit. I think, unfortunately, when one group does better, it shouldn't be seen as a zero-sum game. I think that you look at medical schools, you look at law schools, you look at academic performance, girls and women are outperforming men. So that's, I think, in some ways, a very significant improvement for women in society. And I think we still need more female CEOs. I think that often women are put in leadership positions in declining industries.
What do they call that? The glass cliff?
Yeah, the glass cliff, exactly. But I do think we're making progress. I still think there is so much implicit bias out there, Sally, that even that people don't recognize. I know we're not going to get political, but one of my female doctors told me she didn't think Kamala Harris had the stature to deal with world leaders. And as another friend of mine said, "Oh, you should have said, are you saying she doesn't have the penis to deal with world leaders?" And I think that sometimes it's so deep seated and such a product of cultural conditioning. It's hard for people to even recognize when these feelings, these almost visceral feelings that perpetuate misogyny and sexism exist. And I think that's one of the really important things that we need to become more aware of and obviously, try to mitigate, but it's really, really hard.
Well, I think that's why your success and all of our success is so important. That's why continuing the fight or offering flexibility for corporate America to offer the binary choice if you have a kid and you come back or you don't within this finite window, like that's wrong. I think that there's so much economic upside, let alone societal upside, and figuring out how to keep women employed and how to have men and women at the table represented in all forms of work and all forms of government because we have a different point of view. We have a different skill set. Our goal with Argent, and this is why you're the embodiment of it, is to offer representation because if you can see it, you can believe that you can be it and you can also believe that it's possible. And that's ultimately the challenge that we have at the presidential level is that we haven't seen that before. And I think you have modeled this by being on CNN, NBC, famously the co-host of the Today Show. You've been the face of news my entire existence.
Well, that's really why I went to CBS. Ultimately, it was probably not the best career move for me, even though I have no regrets. But I think it was a culture clash in a way. I went to the most traditional network that I think really favors people who've come through the system within that network. So I was viewed as not only an outsider and a disruptor, but, my gender was also different too. So I think it was really hard for that culture to wrap its head around who I was as a person and embrace me for a lot of different reasons. But I really wanted little girls and little boys and big boys and big girls to see a female in an authority role that heretofore they had not really been exposed to. That someone with lipstick and, not wearing a suit and tie could actually be someone who could deliver the news fairly and with competence and confidence. And that was really the driving force for me to make that move. And so I couldn't agree with you more. We have to see female leaders. We have to make sure that people are exposed to those female leaders and that, because they are held to a higher standard, and I think a lot of people are rooting for them to fail in some cases, how we can support them more so that they will do well and then women coming after them will do well, because what happens is if they don't, then it's hard for a lot of women. We've seen this time and time again. And then I was taking a walk this morning with a friend of mine and we were saying, how can women support women more? She has a daughter and she said some of the challenges for her professionally is she feels like women don't open as many doors for her as the men do. And I think that's a really interesting topic that we should talk about. And how do we in a competitive world both be competitive and try to achieve and excel, but also supportive of our colleagues? Because it's interesting, a lot of men aren't going to support each other because they're going to want to crush the other one, right?
They do, though.
You think
feel
so?
Like very differently, and I think women are catching up to that.
How do you think men support each other?
I look at like these privileged men that are coming out of insert Ivy League school here, and they show up, they open their wallets for one another. Say one starts a business, one goes into finance, they'll bring their business to one another. So I think that they're trained more to Or I have a job. We have a job. Let's go golfing. I want you to meet this buddy.
I think you're right when it comes to networking with different people in different jobs where they could be helpful. But I'm thinking about like one single company
Yep.
and people vying for promotions and vying for, the attention of the boss or whatever. I'm not sure in those confines if men are going to really help each other.
Yeah. Fair
I don't
question.
know.
Yeah. I will say, I think we are in a moment in time we've made so much progress collectively as a gender, and that doesn't stop in light of the election outcome. I think that your generation came up during this, under the scarcity mindset where you were pitted against one another intentionally, and that is very much a result of the patriarchy.
Mhm.
Because if you're focused on one another, you're not focused on dismantling the constructs that are not allowing women to move ahead and succeed. I think my generation has been gifted this mindset of abundance.
Mhm.
And I think women are starting to recognize that all boats rise with the tide. And they're going to be bad actors, male and female. But we are benefiting from bringing men into the conversation around women and being a part of the solution because they do have a lot of the power. They have a lot of the money. They have a lot of the access. But I also think what we were collectively able to do around Vice President Harris in this election is pretty remarkable. I think women insulated her, so you didn't see as much coverage around likability and some of the things that happened to Secretary Clinton. So I think that we're progressing. I also think we're talking about like ambition and investment and money and ways that were historically taboo.
Yes, but then I look at like the amount of venture capital dollars that go into women's startups, right? And I'm trying to do a documentary about the disparities in women's health and women's health research.
Totally.
And isn't it like 2% or something?
It's roughly 2%. I don't know what the most recent statistic was. The highest I've ever seen it is 2.9%.
So that is really a travesty.
Yes.
So you think about all the progress we've made, yes, and but just that number is a stark reminder of how little confidence and faith a lot of these venture capital firms have in female startups, and how women and what women need in society in general, and efforts to address those through startups and entrepreneurs are not taken that seriously.
Totally. Yeah, it's pattern recognition too.
Pattern recognition. What do you mean exactly? Sorry, I know I'm asking you a question.
Yes.
But.
No, that's okay. I mean, we have seen what a guy in a hoodie that is a college dropout, we've seen what he can achieve. And so because I've seen that form of success, I'm going to put my money there.
Right. Isn't that crazy?
Yes. Again, because
but it's a real thing.
It's a very real thing. And money is everything in this world, like in the startup world, I mean. So when you start a company, it allows you to fail and have these micro failures, which are necessary in building something that's ultimately successful. It also allows you to buy eyeballs. So there are a lot of consumer brands that are male founded that received so much more money that of course you know about because they had $500 million in funding compared to women get not even 2% of that.
Right. So success begets success. And,
yes.
And that's what you're calling pattern recognition. There's also this professor at the Harvard School of Education, Nazrin Banaji, I think is her name. And she wrote a book, and it's all about how our brain is programmed to make connections. And we connect certain images with certain things. So really, that's another way of describing pattern recognition. And from an early age, if you see a mom cooking, you think all women are, housewives, or that they have to do the lion's share of domestic duties. And it's really interesting. And and again, these connections start at an extremely young age, and it's really hard to break them.
Yes. Yeah. Oh, God. I could go on about in like every direction imaginable. Back to you.
Okay.
Back
sorry.
to you. Some might say that you're an oversharer.
Really?
You probably haven't heard that before. You have.
Do people call me an oversharer?
do they not?
No.
Really?
Well, not really.
Oh, I love this reaction. Okay. Well, you have quite literally televised your own colonoscopy.
Yeah.
And you were very public with your battle with breast cancer. You wrote an incredibly revealing memoir, Going There, which I touched on earlier, but it was so well done. And it talked about a very devastating loss at a time where your kids were the ages of my kids. So I think I just connected with you and the story. And so you've shared a lot of that personal loss with your first husband, Jay, and you've just had a lot of honest reflections. And I think that you do approach the world in a really open way.
I think of overshare kind of in a negative way. And I think when I have shared things, it has all been toward a stated goal.
100%. Yeah.
When I had a colonoscopy on national television, because as I always say, nothing says good morning like showing your colon at 7:30 a.m. But, it is because I had this extraordinary, horrible, horrific experience with my 41-year-old husband who was diagnosed with colon cancer. And I had learned so much. And one of the most important things I learned is that it's highly preventable and has something like a 93% cure rate if it's detected early. Now, Jay was so young, he didn't qualify to get a colonoscopy. But if we'd been more aware of the symptoms, maybe he would have gone to the doctor sooner. And so doing that, I thought was a real public service, honestly. And I had this platform. And I thought it would almost be selfish not to share what I had learned, and that I had the potential to save a life or several lives was so not really daunting, but I saw it as this extraordinary opportunity. So that's why I did that. And in fact, there was a 20% increase in colon cancer screenings. And, you look behind that percentage and you see a lot of fathers and mothers and sisters and brothers and aunts and uncles are alive today because they saw something and realized either they had symptoms or they needed to get a baseline colonoscopy. And Sally, people still come up to me and say, you saved my uncle's life, or you saved my mom's life, or, she was diagnosed at stage 2 and where it's much easier to treat. So, I feel like I met the moment in a very responsible way. And similarly, when I was diagnosed with breast cancer, I had known, because I can afford high quality health care, that I had dense breasts, that I needed to get not only a mammogram, but a breast ultrasound every time I was screened. And sure enough, in that breast ultrasound, my radiologist saw something funky. And I think I deal with challenges or setbacks or problems as a reporter. Like, I try to get to the bottom of it and to really understand what's happening. And I saw that 42% of women 40 and over have dense breasts. Many don't know they have dense breasts because it's only indicated through a mammogram. They don't know that they need to get additional screening. And I started looking into that and realizing I have an opportunity to really inform people about this. And this is why I got into journalism, honestly, to shed light on things, to, yes, speak truth to power, but also just arm people with the information they need to live better, longer, healthier lives. So it just is such a no-brainer to me. And I think when you have personal experience with something, your wealth of knowledge is so much bigger. You're not an outsider. You've lived it. So you really understand it more than a reporter who's just assigned a story. So I think it's just a powerful, powerful combination, and can be so influential in sort of the public square to talk about something that you've experienced personally.
Yeah. Yeah. I also think that you are very open and warm and welcoming. And so I think that is important too in a media role where it is a bit disarming. So I feel like people have opened up to you and it's made you successful in your career. Can we talk about failure for a minute? And we've touched on it a little bit. I think that it's incredibly important and valuable to be transparent about when things don't go the way that we'd hoped. And it's an inevitability. And I actually think it's a sign that you're on the right path when you're failing,
Mhm.
because it means you're pushing yourself. And
Well, it means you took a risk, right?
correct.
There was no certainty of the outcome.
Correct. So you've talked about this in your book, but you shared about struggling at CBS Evening News and at the Katie Show. How did you learn to navigate failure? And was there anyone that you were leaning on, especially when your work is so public and you're
Yeah.
having to do the job and process?
Yeah. You know, listen, I think there's no way around it. Failure is painful,
Mhm.
right? And I think kind of accepting that is the first step too,
Mhm.
that it's disappointing and there's a certain amount of shame involved in it and coulda, woulda, shouldas and what could I have done differently? I think a very healthy perspective of the reasons why something didn't work is critically important. So looking at the big picture, and maybe it was something that you could have done differently, but I think, and I'd love to hear what you think about this, Sally, but I think there are probably a confluence of factors that contribute to something not working out.
Mhm.
And I think being able to look at those in a clear eyed way and not just blame yourself is really important. That doesn't mean not having accountability, because I think you can do that, but you can also understand and appreciate other things that for whatever reason didn't go right for you. So I don't know. I think that for me, I think having a lot of loss in my life has also given me a certain perspective on setbacks. You know, I think when Jay died and then my sister Emily, she was 54, he was 42, you realize that you only have a finite time on the planet. And the faster you're able to process things and move on, the better. I always kind of want to be in a place of borderline happiness,
Mhm. Mhm.
and I think that I was also lucky. I mean, to be honest with you, Sally, I think it's important to point out that I was financially secure when these failures
Yeah.
happened. And it's very, very different when you are worried about, feeding your family, paying the bills, buying a house. There are a lot of things. So I think that's really important to state, because I think it depending on your situation, it's a very different thing.
Mhm.
So I think for me, it was more of the public humiliation and sort of shame I felt and personal disappointment. But I also knew that I was going to be okay financially, even if these things didn't work out. So that gave me a huge cushion of comfort.
Yeah, you've also talked about it, which I think is such a gift and so necessary, because it's what we've talked about this entire conversation. But failure is happening for all of us in different ways, on different levels, of different magnitude.
Hmm.
But I do think that it's necessary for us to continue making progress. And I think the more we talk about it,
Yeah,
the less shame
normalize
there
it,
is. Yeah.
right?
Because it's really, I mean, there's a stigma attached to it that I think is so unhealthy and unnecessary. The healthy I think the healthy place to land is, what can I learn from this, and
And
what
how is it going to maybe affect my path moving forward?
correct.
Sometimes failure, I think, is God's way of telling you maybe this wasn't the right thing for you.
Yeah.
I'm not particularly religious, but maybe, you should say, why wasn't I good at this? Maybe I didn't really like it,
Yeah.
or maybe it was a toxic work environment, or maybe I just didn't jive with the personalities here. Maybe my skill set isn't this, it's that,
Yeah.
right? I always tell my girls it's important when you have a job, it also tells you what you don't want to do in some cases. So it's less of a failure, it's maybe just a bad fit.
Yeah, I think perspective is exactly right. I think you have this, but gratitude. Like, I feel like I start every day quite grateful. Like, we are privileged in different ways, and it's just a gift that we're even able to be in the jobs or the rooms that we are.
Yes.
And I think that really shapes your experience. Okay, on to something kind of fun. fashion and your own personal style, which you touch on a little bit in the book. First of all, I want to say it's an honor to have you out in the world in Argent. So thank you always.
Of course.
But what was it like figuring out what to wear and how to present yourself in each of your public roles?
I feel like some people sort of have this foundational style that they stick with all their lives. And I think I see clothes as a way to express myself in different ways on different days and how I'm feeling. And so I think for me, I would try to have fun with clothes. When I was on the Today Show, I was very conscious of my audience. In my mind's eye, it might have been a young associate getting up and getting dressed and going to her law firm. And I thought, I'm going to wear clothes that are accessible, that she could afford. And so I was very conscious of not going to Gucci. And that's not really who I am anyway, because I'm very frugal and really look for value in my clothes. And so I think that's something I always kept in mind. And I think my style changed so much through the years. I went from this short-haired brunette kind of girl next door, and I write about this, as you said, Sally, to kind of focusing on a little more on my femininity. But I think also the culture would change. And I think the way I presented myself was the result of the culture changing as well, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So we started because I read a study that showed that women are judged based on appearance, and they quantify the impact of what you wear on your bottom line over your lifetime. It's really significant. And I took that information and felt like we could start a company that offered a product that actually focused on working women, but gave them confidence. Because I think if you dress the part, if you feel great in what you're wearing, you step into a room differently, you carry yourself differently,
Totally.
But it also forces people to pay attention to your message. And that's really the goal at the end of the day in a work setting or on the news.
Right.
How do I show up in a way that's accessible, that reinforces my message?
Yeah, it's interesting because when I got to CBS, my mandate was to make the news a little less voice of God, a little less serious, to have a little more humanity and heart to the broadcast. And I remember I wore things that, like a blouse or, something, or maybe even a sweater. And I was struggling. The ratings were struggling. I was struggling. The press was ruthless. And, internally, people were trying to sabotage me. It was really fun, Sally. But I remember a new executive producer came in and said, "You've got to wear a jacket every night." And I said, "Why? I don't want to wear a jacket every night. I want to wear different things." And he said, "Nope, you have to wear a jacket every night." And I did.
The irony now, we were just in an article in the Washington Post, and it was about how the news is now in neon and how media personalities are dressing differently. And you open that door to them, I think.
I don't know. But I think
I do.
I don't know. But isn't that interesting? And I think he was right. I think sometimes women's clothes are a little distracting, right? We have more things for people to look at.
Yeah.
It's not a uniform as much. It's not nobody was saying, "Oh, did you like Brian Williams' tie that night?"
Never noticed it.
And it's just, it just disappears. And I think even, I don't know about you, but I find myself looking, "Oh, what necklace does she have on? Oh, that's a pretty jacket," or "Her hair looks nice. Oh, I like those earrings." So there's more to kind of be distracted by, I think. And that's, I think, one of the things that made it hard for women, at least visually, to be in these positions.
So let's talk about Katie Couric Media. Was this your first time being a founder?
Yes.
Oh, great. Okay. You've worked with...
I'm an entrepreneur, Sally. Just like you.
We share this masochistic quality. What has it been like working for yourself?
It's been really fun. It's been very liberating. It's been exciting, at times frustrating. But in general, it's been great. And I have to say, I could not have done it without my husband, John. I think he has strengths where I'm weak, and I have strengths where he's not as strong. I wouldn't say he's weak, but not as strong, just because I've been a journalist my whole life, and he's been a financial person, at Brown Brothers Harriman. He was a M&A guy. And so he has really, I mean, I look at him, he does golf a little bit, but most days he is on that computer doing Zooms, talking about our mission, talking about our revenue stream, talking about our personnel, talking about where we need to be stronger and focus on. I mean, he's really incredible. Without him, I think this whole thing would have imploded in about a year because I'm all over the place, Sally. It's true. I know who I am at this point. I'm 67 years old. I'm not going to change. I have an idea like every 5 minutes, I have 27 ideas. I am just, as I told you, insatiably curious. So I'm always like, why don't we do this? Why don't we do that? And he is just steady as can be. So I feel really grateful that John was willing to devote all of his time to this endeavor.
What is the mission?
The mission is to give people quality, accurate information and develop a community of people who care about, similar things, care about the country, care about the world, care about tackling big issues, care about staying healthy, care about cute clothes, kind of care about, want to have a full and rich life and want to be informed about everything. And so it's also, we consider ourselves a thoroughly modern media company because we're not on television. We are going where consumers are. And it's funny, everything that I've been doing and we've been doing for the past 6 years was sort of validated with this election. This, suddenly people were like, oh my God, legacy media does not have the foothold in the culture or in society it once did. It's so fragmented. People are creating their own media ecosystems and bubbles. And so I think I was pretty prescient about the landscape changing. So I embrace that. But we want to bring the same high quality content that I've always cared about my whole career to digital platforms, to newsletters, to our website, to podcasts, to YouTube, to everything we do. We want it to be high quality and elevating.
And accessible, I'll say, as a consumer. So you are one of my favorite follows on Instagram, but in these moments, I do pull up your channel and just sort of play it in the background while I'm doing work and just sort of catching up. But there's something with the familiarity of having it come from you. It's trustworthiness.
That's the thing. I think we realized early on that as trust in institutions, and we've seen this in spades recently, has declined precipitously. Trust in individuals and in companies has really grown. So what we do, because companies, I don't know, it's interesting how they're struggling now and what kind of role they'll play. But for a while there, if you looked at the Edelman Trust Barometer or the Business Roundtable, you saw companies stepping into the void of caring about the world, caring about different issues, because consumers, and I'd love to hear your take on this, Sally, consumers want to support companies that they see have some kind of mission other than simply the bottom line. And I also think employees want to work for a place they feel good about, that their bosses and that their colleagues are interested in making the world a better place, to sound cheesy. So we decided we were going to partner with different companies like Humana or Exact Sciences or gosh, we've done so much work with so many different companies. Procter and Gamble, Mark Pritchard is kind of the personification of this. And say, how can we tell stories that are supported by brands who have the same values without being branded content? So we're not trying to necessarily sell Procter and Gamble products, but to work with them and say, these two little girls in Montgomery, Alabama have a whole organization where they distribute feminine products to underserved kids. That's a great thing. That's kind of a win-win-win for everyone.
You do such a great job of platforming others and supporting others. And that is certainly the case for me, but I am not the only one that you've done this for. I think you've done this for countless people. You really do walk the walk. I think that you have made yourself accessible and lift up values aligned initiatives and individuals in a way that's remarkable and such a gift. The one thing you just did, which I think is a really critical, you displayed a self-awareness that we all don't possess in terms of what your strengths and weaknesses are, and you can speak to them. I think the best leaders are able to do that. I certainly know where I don't need to be taking the lead. And I think that that's necessary in starting your own company. And then when it comes to shopping our values, I'm not totally sold that we're doing that yet. I think that when we sometimes are driven maybe by the price of something, and I can just speak from a fashion perspective, fast fashion still very much wins out when it shouldn't. But I think at the end of the day, someone's looking for a shirt to wear to a party that's cheap and easy and stylish. And so I'm hoping that we see improvement on shopping our values.
Have you found the fashion industry is kind of starting to align about those things? Because, I was just scrolling Instagram per usual, and I saw Amber Valletta is really involved in fashion and sustainability, which I thought was really interesting. And it seems like there's certainly a lot of awareness, but I think you're right. If fast fashion was being sort of shamed for their poor environmental practices and filling up landfills, et cetera, they wouldn't be popping up on every corner.
Correct. I think that there's a long way to go, and consumers have so much power, and we don't always recognize that. Okay, I couldn't pass up the opportunity to ask for some advice for myself as a new podcast host, not just for me, but for others. I think one of the things that excites me is that there's so many different careers that we can now pursue. And so there are some people that are starting podcasts, and that's an entire career. And there are people who are starting in media careers. So I want to hear what advice you have as one of the most adept interviewers in the world. What tips do you have for me, for anyone that's interested?
Well, I think podcasting, you just have to be naturally curious. And I think you obviously are skilled in this area. And I think you just did a great job. I think you have to do your research. I think coming up with interesting topics that may be a little bit off the beaten path, because a lot of times people do these if they're interviewed and they don't want to talk about the same things over and over again. So I think coming up with different new questions is always sort of fun and makes for a more engaged interviewee at times, I think. And in terms of like people who are out there trying to develop a brand or support their brand or increase their brand's awareness, I think you have to diversify your portfolio. It's very different now. I think you have to have a mission and what you really care about and how you translate that on a variety of platforms and iterate that message on different platforms. Advertising is so different now. Social media is so important now, for better or for worse. And so I think to have a consistent message and to be able to really use your platform for good, like you were doing, Sally, and, making sure that, well, what would be good for Threads? What would be good for YouTube? How can we do something different? How do we do in-person gatherings? Because people are desperate for community. And are there ways, I don't know, maybe it's too soon to think about this. The country is so divided and polarized. Are there ways for us to kind of understand what we have in common? Is that a good thing? Is that something you care about? And just figuring out, like, what do I care about and how am I going to tackle that? And I don't want to swallow the ocean, but, where can I make a real difference? And I think that has to be part of your mission. And then you have to kind of execute it accordingly. Does that make sense?
Lots of sense. Yeah, it's great. I also touched on a topic that I would love to go on and on about, but I just don't feel that we are as polarized as we are made to feel like we are.
Maybe you're right. Maybe, yeah, I think that may be a good point.
I just think that needs to be what's next. This is totally tangential, but Missouri voted for 3 fundamentally very democratic initiatives.
Minimum wage, abortion rights.
And days off, and then voted for Josh Hawley and Donald Trump. And so I just think that there's a 90% overlap in terms of what people want and what people think and believe. And unfortunately, we're in a really fraught media landscape.
The media isn't to blame, but the landscape is. And I think as it's become more fragmented, they've had to become more ideological in order to maintain an audience. I mean, I guess in a way it's to blame because they have these corporate owners and they have to get it ratings and viewers and quarterly profits and all that jazz. So I think the public service angle of media for the public good and really educating the electorate has been lost to these niche outlets that don't necessarily have the common good in mind. It's kind of a chicken and egg situation now, and I think it's going to be really hard to change. So that is something that I think about all the time.
That's my idea for a podcast. It's like approachable politics, because I have so many friends, and I know you're the same because I grew up in Savannah, Georgia, and I went to school in Greenville, South Carolina, that will not talk about politics. Still.
People get mad at me sometimes on my feed. Like they're like, thanks for making that turmeric, ginger, orange juice, lemon shot, cayenne pepper and whatever. Stop talking about politics. But it's so important to me.
It's so important. I will not stop. Okay, Katie, we're going to do a fun, easy game of Would You Rather. Oh, but she sit up and she gets nervous.
Okay,
She perks up. Okay. Would you rather burn the midnight oil or start your day before sunrise?
I'd probably rather burn the midnight oil.
Really?
Yeah.
That was not what I would have
night
guessed.
person. I'm a night person, believe it or not.
Would you rather fly only red eyes or fly only in the middle seat?
Only in the middle seat. Red eyes, they crush me now.
Mm-hmm.
I'm too old for red eyes, Sally.
Mm-hmm. I love a good red eye.
You do?
Mm-hmm.
Oh God.
I could do a middle seat red eye. I can sleep like this.
Really?
But don't even recline.
No, I can't do that. And if it's not long enough, like if it's only 4.5 hours,
that's the bad part.
The worst.
Correct. That's the downside.
I need a lot of sleep, Sally.
Yes. Yeah, same. I just don't get it. Would you rather get the case of the giggles or totally go blank on live television?
Case of the giggles.
Would you rather start a career in media in the 90s or in the present day?
The 90s. For sure.
I think insert any company better in the 90s, less saturated. Would you rather write a great piece of feedback or receive a great piece of feedback?
Receive a great piece of feedback.
Would you rather dress up or dress down for work?
Dress up.
Would you rather accidentally leave your mic unmuted or your camera on?
I'd rather leave my camera on.
Same. Would you rather interview or be interviewed?
Both. I like them both, actually.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah. I mean, to me, this was more of a conversation. I think I feel more comfortable interviewing because I'm more in charge, but I also like being interviewed by someone I like.
I'm better off being interviewed. Interviewing is hard.
You think?
Mm-hmm. Well,
just have to ask questions. Then you can think about what you need to buy at the grocery store. I'm kidding. You have to listen. You have to listen. That's the most important thing. You really have to listen and you really have to care. And you have to make the person believe you are really interested in them, even if you're not.
What great advice. Do you know why I think it's hard is because I then will find myself thinking about things I could have asked or like where I could have dug in
I used
more.
to do that all the time too. You'll get over that.
And then I'm going to follow that by saying thank you for everything. You're just the best. And I am incredibly grateful for all that you've done for me and everyone that you've touched. You really have moved mountains, I think, and made the impossible possible for men and women, honestly. But
don't we have more time for this? Sally.
Also, thank you for the best night of my life when we went to the NBA game.
Oh
that
my God. Sally was so, okay, everyone. Sally was so cute when we went to the basketball game. It was, I mean, maybe better than having her 2 children. I'm kidding. But you were so excited.
Best memories.
You were so excited. That was so fun.
But thank you.
We'll go to another game this year.
I mean, I'll show up and tell me. You give me 2 minutes notice. I'm there.
Okay, let's do it. It's a date.
Thank you, Katie. Thanks for everything. Thanks for listening to Work Friends, a podcast from Argent. Listen and follow on all podcast platforms and subscribe to the Argent YouTube channel for more clips and bonus content. Plus, email your work questions and dilemmas at workfriends@argentwork.com for a chance to have one of our amazing guests weigh in with advice. I'm Sally Christensen, and we'll see you next time. Work Friends. Work Friends is produced by Gina Marinelli with editing by Justin Kropp. Our theme music is by Karina De Piano and Melanie Naima.